Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited. We have a great group here, and it's going to be a really special conversation. It's really about installing and living company values, which really pays off when it comes time to sell a business. So I'm Todd Sullivan, CEO of Exitwise. We're here to help business owners create the exits they deserve. Today, I'm joined by Alex Gershenson. He's one of our exited founders, for those of you who know what our exited founder platform is all about. Alex co-founded SupplyShift, and that's a supply chain sustainability software company that he built over a series of 11 years and successfully sold to Sphera, who you might not know, but it is owned by Blackstone, big organization that a lot of people know. He sold that in 2024. We're going to hear about Alex's playbook for not just creating company culture, but installing and living those values to make your company run better, make it run more profitably, and be substantially more attractive to buyers when it comes to sell. And I think the part that every business owner really needs to listen to is that the decisions that you make today about company culture, they're really going to impact your team, your hiring, your internal processes, your customer relationships, and your financials. And all of those decisions really determine the number and type of buyers that are going to be interested in your company. And really that's what drives exit value when it's time to sell. So today, Alex is going to break down his entrepreneurial backstory. We'll get specific around company values he and his team lived at SupplyShift that really made the business attractive to employees, customers, and ultimately his acquirer. And finally, how founders can think about their company values and exit value and why they're connected much more than people really think. So before we jump in, please check out our Exited Founder Marketplace. This is where business owners can learn from and work with people just like Alex. We have over 100 exited founders today. It's growing every week, and they're across many different industries, and they're ready to help you grow your business, position the business for exit, and then help sell the business when the time is right. So Alex, thank you for being here. Let's jump in.
Stoked to be here. Looking forward to it.
So let's start with, tell us about the entrepreneurial journey. What brought you into starting companies? Take us back a little bit so we get to know you.
I describe myself as a recovering academic. I started my career as a climate scientist. I was teaching at San Jose State. In parallel, myself and some folks that I went to grad school with started a consulting company called EcoShift Consulting. And yeah, we're not very good at naming companies. There's a theme there. And EcoShift Consulting was just a standard consulting and then a tech-enabled services business. We built some very rudimentary technology for analysis of climate mitigation options, economics, carbon payback, inventory, and things like that. And this was in the late aughts. And by the beginning of the teens, we realized that companies would need to understand what's going on in their supply chains. And we looked around, and there wasn't really a good option for supplier engagement and data collection around carbon and other things. And we said kind of the dumbest thing you can possibly imagine, which is, it can't be that hard. We'll just build it ourselves, having never built software. Yeah, we thought it would be 6 months to build it. It took considerably longer than that. And basically, as we started, building, it was just me and my co-founder from EcoShift land. We learned a hell of a lot about building a software business because, of course, with consulting, it's a completely different business, completely different financials, completely different focus. And with software, you need a real team. So along the way, the business grew and kind of the market caught up to our vision. We were a bit early when we started, but the market caught up to our vision. And then we exited to Sfera and I spent some time at Sfera for the transition. And now I'm largely full-time helping founders avoid some of the dumb mistakes that I made as a first-time founder who didn't know any better in the beginning.
Yeah, it's 11 years, right? Building from beginning to end. And yeah, having to really understand the business models of a couple of different types of businesses, right? So, I mean,
Indeed.
we can talk about that journey of actually building product market fit, getting the unit economics right. But really the topic for everyone today, why people came, is you viewed company culture as paramount to the
Absolutely.
success of this business. So
Hmm.
I don't want to put the words in your mouth, right? I've heard the story several times. Like, in your words, why don't you talk about, the why, how you did it, and why it ultimately created enormous value in the company.
Yeah. So the why is pretty simple. The way that I look at it is that the most important asset that you build is not really your software, it's your team. SupplyShift went through a couple of exogenous explosions such as COVID and SVB collapse and, various exogenous factors, changes in regulatory regimes because supply chain sustainability, there's a lot of regulatory kind of changes and it's a volatile regulatory environment. And so, you can always build new software, you can always change your software, but you have to have the team that will be there through those cataclysms, right? And every startup, even if you're not in supply chain sustainability, every startup goes through, oh crap moments. And with the right team, you can weather them and survive them and thrive through those cataclysms. And in the beginning, it was kind of organic. We didn't codify our culture or our values, from day one because we're small and everybody could kind of see what we're about, right? That we're about making an impact, that we're about collaboration, that we're about transparency. These were all things that we focused on internally and help our customers do it. And, at some point the team grew large and we started having some folks remote. And so kind of relying on osmosis for permeating company culture became hard. And my team actually came to me and said, Alex, we need to write these down. We need to have an exercise of writing these down. And I, initially I will admit, and I was wrong. I was like, wow, this sounds like too much of that kind of crappy marketing, website copy for all sorts of companies, put all sorts of buzzwords on their values page and then don't live them. And right. Enron had a, be responsible company value, right? It's not always right. But I said, I trust the team, right? And if I will go along and participate and support this exercise. And then when I saw the conversations that were happening in the exercise, one of the things that I realized is that what I assumed everybody was on board with and everybody knew and realized wasn't the case. My assumption was wrong. I just assumed that people felt the same way that I did, but that wasn't the case. And there were certain things that they highlighted as hugely positive for them as employees that I didn't even think were worth highlighting. There were certain things that came out that surprised me. And through the exercise of bringing people together and having ownership across teams, right? And each team provided a representative for the values kind of task force. I was blown away. And, I'm wearing this t-shirt for a reason. These are SupplyShift company values. This is what the team came up with, and they hired, a graphic designer to represent them. And they, when they were codified and agreed upon, it was a long process. It was a very deliberate process. Things changed drastically. And
Let me stop you for a second, because I think for the audience, right, a lot of us can relate to this idea of having a company culture built on osmosis, right? You have one person, two people, three people, four people, and you tend to hire people that fill a role, but they're going to work with the people that they like, right? So osmosis takes over. And I know at our company, we're incredibly mission driven, not about the dollars. So everybody here understands that this is about helping our fellow founders. And that's if you if you react with that in mind, every answer to these more complex problems become much easier, right? So you're doing that. And then it becomes, okay, we're getting big enough. We have to be intentional about this. And then there's the next step of designing the business process. So you've let your employees participate in this process, right? So I think inherently you're going to get company values that resonate with the people that are there, the people that want to stay. So I think that like tactically is a really interesting gift to the audience here, is that you're going to go through stages of this, right? I think naturally. The other benefit I think you have is that your product is really about supply chain transparency, right? So the people that want to work in that area, you're
Build
coming together, right?
transparency.
So, yeah, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah. Look, every single value had everything to do with both internal and customer value, right? So build transparency was one of the company values, and it had to do with both transparent supply chains, right? We're building transparent supply chains for our customers, and transparency internally, make an impact. Obviously, we were an impact focused company because of what we did, but also our customers wanted to make an impact and wanted to improve their operations. Champion collaboration. We wanted to we wanted to ensure that our teams collaborated and that collaboration was seen as a value, and our customers needed to collaborate with their suppliers. And I can keep going. I'm not going to go through all of the values, but it was absolutely critical that as part of the emerging champion collaboration value, that the team, this wasn't a top-down, directive of here are now our company values, right? This was how do we grow and maintain what we already have today? And we recognize that we can't do it through osmosis.
I think what I'm hearing, right, and I'm realizing this now for kind of the first time, is that there was one stage of kind of installing these corporate values as the organization got larger, but it sounds like your customers played a role in that, at least knowing what your customers want, but also how you grow, right? Because now you're bringing on customers that value these things that your employees value. Can you talk about, I want to get more specific, right? Because we're more, finance side.
Sure.
Talk to me about where you saw all of this really affect the P&L, and then we'll talk about M&A.
Sure. There are a couple of numbers that matter. Average employee retention, right? And hiring cost. So even during the crazy days when nobody could hire anybody in 2021, 2022, we had hundreds of applicants for every position. When my colleagues and other, my friends, my, fellow co-founders of other companies were spending enormous amounts of money on recruiting, we didn't, because people want to work for mission-driven companies who wear their mission on their sleeve, right? It is critical. And then once they're there, they stay. And of course, retention of talent is incredibly important and incredibly costly if you don't get it right, because we all know that retention is far cheaper than recruiting, right? And the loss of institutional knowledge that you get, especially in a small team, right? Each person carries a lot of the know-how and of the, things that might not be fully documented yet. As, of course, every startup has everything documented perfectly. Right. So we had an average tenure when we were acquired. We had an average tenure of close to 5 years, and this is a startup, right? Yeah. This just doesn't happen without the team understanding that they are part of a team.
Well, this idea of being overtly mission driven to attract talent, right? I get that. Is the type of talent, do you think that that's changed where it's a younger generation that really resonates with, or is it now everybody? Like, how did you think about it then?
So we had an incredibly diverse crowd in terms of age. I think our youngest our youngest person at exit was 20, and our oldest person at exit was in their 60s. And I would say all of them were attracted by the mission. So that said, I do think, and research actually bears this out, that Gen Z and to a certain extent millennials are much more likely to stick around and to go and to apply to mission-driven companies, especially the higher performing ones. Mission matters for younger generations more than it does for, X and above.
Okay. So when we look at the financials, right, there's a clear advantage to recruiting and retention, right? That stuff can get very, very expensive, particularly in the cataclysmic, as you put it, events that hit the world. Now talk to me about the customers, right? Because you had incredible customer retention that your buyer was like, oh, wow, this whole system really works. It may be obvious, but talk to me a little bit.
Yeah. And it's harder to quantify this. So I'll go with my gut, but I think it's important for founders to remember that you'll never have perfect information. When we would go through these exogenous events, our customers stayed with us because they saw us as partners, right? They saw us as partners, not just vendors. And this is what I tell founders today is make sure that you're seen as a partner and not a vendor, because when things get tough, vendors get dropped and partners are kept, right? So I think the reason why they saw us as partners, not vendors, is because the folks that they were talking to every day were the best. And they brought their best, right? They brought their best self every day to those conversations. Speaking of which, that's another company value. Be your best self, right? When you bring the best to every conversation, and when you do the absolute max for the customers, they know it. And so they will continue working with you because they see you as part of their team.
I think I'm going to steal that, in that this idea of vendors get dropped, partners get kept. That's really key. And so what I want everybody to understand that's listening is this is directly affects your exit value when you look at churn in your space. And I say you talk about it anecdotally, but as a group that helps founders sell businesses, we know and buyers know exactly the churn rates that are average for that particular industry. And when you rise above that, I'm sorry, when I say churn, I mean customer churn. And so if you rise above this, people want to know why, right? Is that real? What's the secret sauce here? And they're willing to pay for that, right? So not only do you have the retention, lower recruiting or need to recruit, and therefore, and also your customer loyalty is so much higher. That is just leading to awesome exit value. I do want to state one other thing just for learnings, because a lot of our audience are business owners that have like $1 million, $2 million, $3 million of ARR. And the question is always, should I grow or should I become profitable? And it can be either of those decisions. Maintaining a growth rate is really important if you're thinking about selling the business. But what I'm circling back to is customer churn. That should be part of the equation. It's enormously valuable if your churn is much lower than your industry average. And that's what you were able to do. All right. So kind of we're triangulating here into the M&A transaction. Can you talk about how did the conversations initiate? How did you choose this partner? And what did they recognize, that was so special in you?
I mean, how it originated was we had a couple of different options on the table, and we decided to partner with somebody who had other pieces of the corporate sustainability puzzle. So it was basically focused on the customer, right? And we knew that we couldn't provide all the things, we couldn't build all the things that our customers were starting to need because of certain regulatory things, or we kind of knew that they would need in the near future, right? And so it was okay, so do we create a partnership ecosystem, and those are always funky? Or do we join forces with somebody that's got other pieces of the corporate sustainability and environmental health and safety puzzle, but they don't have the supply chain piece? And the decision was, yeah, let's do that. And, Sphera had all the other pieces of the puzzle, from life cycle assessment to kind of internal carbon management, but they didn't have supply chain sustainability and supplier engagement. And so it was kind of the marriage made sense from just an industrial logic perspective, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we see that all the time. I think if you haven't heard me say that before, a lot of great strategic partnerships are formed that way, where you're an arrow in somebody else's quiver. They've got 8 arrows and they're missing that 9th and 10th, and you fill that gap. Starting out partnering with them in that way is a great way to eventually get acquired. But the corporate development firms, the product firms, the sales groups on these bigger companies are trying to say, hey, we want to sell more things to our customers.
Yep.
Now you're bringing a whole set of customers that are super loyal. So they're also thinking, wow, this is another group, that a set of customers that we can sell our 9 other arrows to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly
it
right.
really does make a ton of sense to find a group like that. Okay, so that's in all M&A. Can you talk a little bit about how yes, you're in an area where kind of corporate sustainability is the hot button here, but how did they see your company culture and customer loyalty as benefits, and how did that progress M&A or maximize your exit value?
Again, a lot of these things are invisible, but I'll just give you one example. So every M&A process, one of the things that is going to be in every M&A process is, an interview of customers. And it typically happens toward the end, right?
Yes.
And it's always, it's kind of like the last check, the sanity check from a buyer perspective.
Yep.
And, the way it normally works is you always go, oh, here are the people that you should talk to. But of course they pick different ones. And first of all, I wasn't worried, right? They could pick anybody, but I was on those conversations. And after every one, I would message the account owner of that and say, you rock. You don't even know why yet, but you rock, because
The account owner is your employee.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would say I'll tell you later why you rock, because of course, M&A process is, but every single customer talking to the folks from the acquiring entity would say, oh my God, yeah, the SupplyShift team, they're just, I mean, they're incredible. Yeah, we have, this is a challenging space, et cetera, but man, the team is just incredible. Right. And after the transaction closed, many times I had people who were not SupplyShift employees, but who were interacting with now former SupplyShift new Sfera employees come to me and say, where did you find all these people? They're all focused and they're all passionate and they all care. I'm like, well, that's how we did it. And, because we lived those values, and we ensured that people who were really living those values were recognized. We had what was probably our best HR tool ever, most effective HR tool, which is an add-on to Slack called Hey Taco. So Hey Taco basically allows you to give virtual tacos. You only get 5 per day, and you can give them to your teammates. And then, they can be redeemed for things that you decide on. Well, when people in a common channel send somebody, all of their 5 tacos for, wow, like you champion collaboration today was, you did it. So there's a public recognition part from within the Hey Taco, and there's a reinforcement of this is how we do things. And it has to start at the leadership level, and it has to go through, everybody's got to live the values. And if, especially new employees, when they come in and they see that this is for real, that this is not bullshit, it changes perspective.
Yep. Let me just back up. We'll tie this up in a second for the audience, but I want to make sure that people understand in an M&A process, when a buyer gets to talk to your customers, this is at the very, very end. You're not even sharing customer names for the most part through this entire process. That is private. If you have any questions about that, please call me. I can walk you through when is the appropriate time if you're not getting that great advice, as could somebody like Alex who has been through that. So those are very sensitive conversations. And I would tell you the majority of people are so uneasy. They don't know what their customers are going to say. But in Alex's case, because of the corporate values and the alignment with customers who are now partners, you're not a vendor to them, those customer conversations go so well. And to a buyer, that is just like unbelievable value. So although they're gone through a lot of the due diligence, right, to that point,
Yep.
the purchase agreements are being worked on, and this is kind of the final phase. If that does not go well, that is a reason to pull the plug on a deal. So that alone, being able to do what you've done with corporate values and aligning them with your customers, it de-risks M&A, right? So I think I'm kind of tying it back that way. The last
Absolutely.
thing that I would touch on, it's because we see this all the time, is that if you aren't aligned and you aren't selling to a company that's aligned, you can have a mass exodus of your employee base. And if any of your compensation in M&A is after the transaction, like earnout or whatever requirements are there, and all your people leave because there isn't that alignment, you can leave a lot of money on the table, or a lot of people can be unhappy. I know in your situation, it was just a marriage really made in heaven, right? Everybody's enjoying the job post, everybody's being successful, right? So, if that led to additional compensation for you, but maybe just touch on that as we tie up here.
Yeah. One of the things and it's not just for me. One of the things that I insisted on is that, and this is atypical in M&A, is that every single one of my employees participates in the post-merger benefits, from the most junior to everybody else. And every single person who moved over, there was a time component and, performance component, etc. But every single person participated in that benefit because it's your team and they built the thing. I mean, yeah, obviously you're the founder, but they should benefit from the exit.
I love that. We did a podcast and webinar with Sean McKenna, who made 5 more millionaires post-transaction by providing tons of incentives, giving a lot of what belonged in his pocket to people after the transaction because they helped get there. And I think that can get overlooked. We see it a lot in M&A, and I think business owners need to be aware that you can leave money on the table if your people aren't happy on the other side of this transaction. And a lot of times it's really the right thing to do. Alex, this has been awesome. Is there anything that you want to kind of tie up here? I mean, I hope we got to the point that the way your company values were created really led to a more profitable company, but then an acquirer who was really the right fit for the business. You de-risked the transaction and you got the outcome that you and everybody was looking for. Is there anything else that I'm missing that we should jump on?
One of the things that I would tell every single new person that I hired, and I had this conversation with every single person, even when we were pretty large and I didn't participate in the hiring process anymore, right? But I onboarded every person and I said, things are going to be stressful at work. I mean, that's just life, right? But I promise you that I will do everything that I can to ensure that the stress is from your work and not from the workplace, right? And I hope that I kept that promise to the vast majority of folks. And I still hear from folks that have moved on and and are doing other things, that, that SupplyShift was the best place they've ever worked. And I think it's because my commitment and what I expected from my leadership team commitment, right, to respect and treat folks as adults and create a positive work environment, that came back tenfold. That came back 100-fold from the team. So it's more important than I thought.
I think we're all going to
and I'm a convert.
I think several people are going to steal that I can promise you, well, not promise you, but you will only have stress from your work, not your work environment. Yeah. That's incredible. Alex, I want to be respectful of everybody's time here, so I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. This is fantastic. For everybody, for business owners out there, I hope this is helpful to you. We're going to drop Alex's exited founder profile in the chat, so please let us know. Alex is in high demand right now, as you can probably guess. He can only help a few founders grow and position their business to maximize an exit this year. So if you're thinking about growing or positioning for a future exit and you think Alex could be helpful, please book him on his profile page sooner than later. If Alex isn't the right fit for you, just search the Exited Founder Marketplace. We've got over 100 people there. Maybe there's somebody in an industry that really fits you better. Regardless, Alex, thank you. Thanks for everybody for listening, and we hope to chat with you soon.
Thanks for inviting us.